Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Asia podcast. I'm Doug Krisner. You can join Brian Curtis and myself for the stories making news and moving markets in the APAC region. You can subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcast and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app.
We're joined by Ross Mayfield, investment strategy analyst at Baird Private Wealth Management. Ross, a little bounce in Samsung here, up about 0.25%. And we got a little hint in late trading that the sell-off in tech might be running its course. It might be a little early, but we did have NVIDIA and AMD jumping. Do you see that as continuing? And what might it mean for the rotation that we have in markets?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's the number one question investors should be asking right now. I think probably the rotation has room to run both in the equities that are starting to outperform, right? So small caps starting from historic valuation, discount to large caps. You have earnings breadth expanding, with things like financials and energy and industrials starting to do well. And then on the other side, you do have this anxiety about all the AI CapEx, whether these big tech companies are going to be able to deliver the growth that is priced into their multiple quarter after quarter. I don't think you have to be down on AI or down on the secular theme to say they can take a little bit more of a pause here. There might need to be a little bit more air let out of the trade before we level set things. Is
there a company that you think is most exposed to that right now that we have yet to hear from?
No, honestly, I think it's all of that have yet to report and that are deeply linked with the theme, right? So there are companies, there are mega cap tech companies that are exposed to AI, but are still primarily, ad companies, where AI is kind of the call option on the stock. And then there are companies that are more deeply levered, where their primary business model is building out the infrastructure, the CapEx, and if there seems to be an unsustainable spending spree, and really what it comes back to for us is, what are the applications on the other side? Where is the payoff that results in the productivity boom? If it's not clear that that's in the next, 12 to 24 months, if it's maybe a longer term theme that has to take some time to play out, then those companies could give back a little bit of growth here. And again, just kind of level set the valuation.
We did see Microsoft announce a lift in AI-led profits from 7 percentage points of the profit to 8 percentage points. And I think maybe as a result of that, that's why you saw NVIDIA jump 5% in late trading. We haven't seen a move like that. It's been all down, really. And then you also had this line from Microsoft, which I thought was quite interesting. A company executive saying that the company does not have enough capacity to meet customer demand for AI services and cloud services. That's something.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and again, it goes to, all right, maybe in the next 6 to 12 months, we could quibble about the speed of this, but the secular theme is there and it's not going away. And there's real, profits and spending and productivity now that we can point to. And I think that differentiates it pretty clearly from some of the other tech hype cycles that we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, where there are real items today you can point to and real earnings and profits you can point to today. And the question now is just how long does it take to spread to the non-tech, non-comm services sectors, and when do the financials companies and when do the utilities start to say, hey, we're seeing meaningful productivity gains because of this investment that we've made in the AI that, the big tech companies are building out the infrastructure for today.
So, Ross, let's go back to the rotation that you touched on a moment ago. I mean, if there were several areas of the market that would kind of come under the umbrella of places to look at in kind of deploying cash that may be right now not necessarily levered, but put to work in a way where you could really captivate on this idea that the Fed is going to be successful in engineering a soft landing and we're going to get some sort of recovery in economic growth. That seems to be one of the questions overhanging the market, no?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that everything we're seeing today with small caps rallying, with all of the other parts of the rotation, are contingent on interest rates are falling because a soft landing is on the horizon. If interest rates are falling in the market because there's a big economic correction on the horizon or because growth is coming under question, then this rotation, to me, doesn't have much room to run. I think right now, the base case is still a soft landing. And so if you're looking to areas of the market that could still have room to run, I think you start with financials. You got rates coming down, you've got lending picking back up in a soft landing. The banks, the capital markets companies, activity on the capital market side is just starting to pick up. It's levered to wealth management, which has been, a behemoth. And down the cap scale, the small cap indices that we reference all the time, they're very much overweight banks and regional banks. So I think you look to financials first as the place to kind of play this theme if soft landing is your base case.
There's some other interesting angles. You got the Intel story today. Sources telling us that Intel will cut thousands of jobs to reduce cost. Now, the politicians want Intel to produce more at home, but it's expensive. So what are the implications of that?
Well, I think it's two parts to the story, right? You've got the broader macro picture, which is that, you can see it in the JOLTS data today. You can see it in any of the labor market indicators over the last couple of months that the labor market is cooling, that we are no longer in the labor market of 2022 or even 2023, and that the demand for labor is not where it was, and that the supply of labor has kind of right-sized. So you have a cooling labor market, and I think that's the primary reason that the Fed needs to come out aggressively indicating a rate cut in September to give the market some confidence and to keep companies from starting to offload labor. But the other thing on the in tech and in trying to onshore some of these more technical or more critical supply chains is that it's just really hard to find the skilled labor here right now to kind of get those up and running. We've seen stories out of Arizona to that same effect, and it's a very different kind of job than we're used to here. So it'll take some time to get the formula right.
Even so, it's more expensive than the labor that, some of these companies have been using in Asia. So it's an interesting ongoing story. Ross, thank you. Ross Mayfield from Baird Private Wealth Management. Vlad Savov joins us now in our studios. Vlad is Bloomberg tech editor to talk a little bit more about Samsung. So we mentioned it was a huge net profit beat. You had chip sales that did well, displays delivering a surprise, and importantly, in artificial intelligence, the HBM high bandwidth memory chip seen as a key driver. I guess there's a lot to like here, Vlad.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can tell the story just by looking at the sales growth. And when you look at memory division, that's more than 140% relative to second quarter last year up. And that's where everything flows from. When you talk about HBM, that's just one part of it. What we're seeing with the entire AI frenzy and spending spree is that when you decide to get the NVIDIA AI accelerators, which require HBM, you can't have bottlenecks elsewhere in your system. So that means you're going to get DDR5, which is the fastest dynamic random access memory. You're going to get solid state as opposed to the old spinning hard drives. You're going to upgrade all across the board, and Samsung benefits with all these upgrades.
So if I look at Samsung, how does this company on the chip side compare to what's been happening at SK Hynix?
Well, that's a very interesting point. SK Hynix has had better chip operating profit for several quarters than Samsung, and that's because SK Hynix is the leader in HBM. It is NVIDIA's preferred partner for HBM. Now, one of the things that just happened yesterday is that Samsung said that it has gotten NVIDIA as a customer. So going forward, Samsung is going to be one of the providers for NVIDIA. Both companies have been looking forward to that relationship happening. And this particular quarter, Samsung's chip operating profit was higher than SK Hynix's.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The stock is up 1% this morning, but Samsung has kind of struggled this year. The stock price only up 3% or so year to date. I know you're not really here to talk about stocks, but are some of those reasons that cause that lag in the stock price, are some of those dissipating?
Well, actually, I do want to talk about stocks. It's really interesting to me how AI has transformed tech stocks in particular. We mentioned Microsoft earlier and how it took as much as an 8% hit on the share price after missing by a sliver the expectations for AI revenue. So it's really fascinating to me that we're seeing kind of like venture capital thinking with some of the world's biggest stocks. And what I mean by that is when you look at Meta and Google, Meta, its share price has shot up just because it's bought a bunch of NVIDIA hardware, just because it said we are in AI and we're really serious about it. Google has taken hits to its share price because its AI assistant has had some malfunctions over the years. And it's fascinating. I mean, when you look at Samsung in isolation, it has brilliant results, but it's just holding steady as far as the share price goes. And that's only because it hasn't had the same up and down roller coaster effect that the likes of SK Hynix have had.
So I also think of smartphones when I think of Samsung, not just the chips. Yesterday we had a story about perhaps a bit of a delay in the rollout of the new Apple Intelligence. Maybe we don't see a perfect alignment between the release of Apple Intelligence and the latest phone, although I find that a little bit hard to believe. Where is Samsung when it comes to AI as it meets the smartphone?
Well, 2024 for Samsung has been a complete rebranding effort. I mean, AI has been in smartphones for ages, but as of 2024, every Samsung smartphone is an AI phone. And it's worth saying their flagship series has done really well. They more than doubled, not more than doubled. They had double-digit growth both in sales and in shipments for the new Galaxy S24 series. So as far as market that's really plateaued, is a really mature market, Samsung has done really well with especially its flagship series, and it says that it's seeing premium demand rising in the latter half of the year.
So I'm curious whether or not you think now, Vlad, that the sell-off that we've seen in some of these high-flying AI companies might be nearing an end, because this was a pretty strong report here. And Microsoft on second reflection actually, said a few things that may encourage investors, particularly that the AI-led profit did increase over last quarter.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Like I say, Samsung gave us really encouraging results. It did say that it sees strong demand through at least the latter half of the year. We're going to have the analyst call with the company executives in a little while, and they can discuss that a little bit further. But all the indications are, both from Microsoft and from Samsung, that the demand is enduring. So, like I say, it's a bit of a roller coaster just because some of this was on blue sky thinking and just expecting AI will be a constant growth driver. I think that has been normalized. There's been an adjustment and a correction. Samsung is one of the companies that never had that sky high rise. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it isn't seeing the same corresponding drop.
And as you pointed out on the MLive blog, a big surprise when it came to the display division. I think operating profit, as you said, was close to double expectations. Very quickly, Vlad, what's driving this?
Well, going back to the Galaxy S24 series, it had a great result, and it is where Samsung puts a lot of its own technology, camera sensors, displays, etc., and maybe looking forward to the next generation iPhone as well.
All right, Vlad, thanks very much for joining us. We've been chatting here with Vlad Savov, Bloomberg Tech Editor. Well, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has trumpeted China's potential for helping bring an end to the grinding war in Ukraine. And she is seeking to forge closer ties with the world's number 2 economy. Joining us now on the program for some discussion is Rebecca Choong Wilkins, Bloomberg Asia government and politics correspondent. So what can we expect out of this China visit by Giorgia Meloni?
Well, all in all, it seems like quite a successful charm offensive by Meloni. I mean, this visit came just after, a few months after she left the Belt and Road Initiative. She was Italy's the only NATO, only G7 country to join. It did ruffle diplomatic feathers when she joined, and it certainly irked Beijing when they departed. So in some ways, a big part of this trip was really to go and smooth things over with President Xi Jinping. And Meloni has sort of touted herself as this very suave diplomat who's able to traverse these divides, so able to talk to, for example, Viktor Orban in Hungary, as well as sort of leaders in France and Germany and so on. And she'd had at some point sort of done these back channel conversations with Orban, for instance. She now seems to see Xi Jinping as a similar such figure, where she, unlike others, is able to kind of bridge out and conduct this kind of diplomatic outreach. The sort of bilateral successes around this, I think, speak to the potential, perhaps, that this might work. Italy and China have renewed these 3 years of cooperation, quite a wide-ranging agreement there, everything from education, food security, a little bit of tech in there, EVs getting a name check, and AI as well.
So if there is a bit of quid pro quo, I'm curious about what China may want from Italy.
Well, I think in some ways China is, against this backdrop of increasing antagonism with the EU, think about tariffs, other probes that they've responded, sort of for tit-for-tat probes, I think is looking for advocates among that cohort of EU countries that can argue its case, essentially. And that becomes more appealing if, for example, we see a President Trump return to the White House and take more punitive action on the EU. That might make some figures in the EU more inclined to sort of reopening and strengthening again those trade lines with China. And China already has close ties with Viktor Orban. We saw Xi stop out there and do that sort of Hungary visit after he visited France. But having another sort of close partner and friend in that cohort is meaningful to Beijing at a moment like this.
Might be a little bit awkward timing, given it comes so closely after Meloni abandoned the Belt and Road Initiative. And I know that there was some doubt as to whether or not she would end up meeting Xi Jinping, given that, everything, really. She's the head of government, he's the head of state, and everything in China. Do we have any inclination on how relations are personally between the two?
Not a great deal. I mean, Meloni, unsurprisingly, we have had more from her side. She characterized this meeting and the discussion as sort of frank and respectful. We did see the sort of images of, these two long tables, as we usually see, sitting down. There was a little bit of chuckling and smiling, as I saw. But one indicator perhaps reflected in Chinese state media, which really has praised the ties. One publication saying so far as this could be a sort of new model for East-West relationships. So in state media, at least, we see really sort of warm words expressed about the potential of this partnership.
What about when it comes to war in Ukraine? I mean, we know that Xi Jinping has pretty much aligned himself with Russian President Putin. Meloni, for her part, maybe a little critical of what's been happening in Ukraine. I mean, is this going to be a big deal, do you think?
I think this is, if not a big deal, but it's probably the big deal when it comes to China and the rest of the EU. It has been a sort of huge sticking point with many, EU and Western, in fact, indeed US folks, feeling that China is not leveraging its relationship with Putin, the so-called no limits relationship, enough, and also, other allegations that China is facilitating the transport of certain, goods to support Russia's industrial war machine. That is a massive sticking point. Meloni has somewhat addressed this. I mean, she mentioned that this sort of Beijing's backing of Russia is a point of great friction, but she also has continually emphasized Xi as a potential sort of key player, Xi as a figure who could be instrumental potentially in trying to bring about, as the Europeans call it, this phrase of a just peace. I think it will continue to be the point of discussion, and it's worth noting that, of course, Xi so far and China so far, other than presenting that peace proposal, which sort of was met with quite a lot of skepticism initially, hasn't done an enormous amount. However, I think as we get closer to the US election, for instance, we see Ukraine trying to organize that second peace summit. Ukraine acknowledges and is aware that has struggled to win over key players like Beijing and other figures in the global South. You can think of Brazil, Indonesia, India, for example, is aware that, again, if Trump were to return to the White House, there is increased urgency if he were to pull back on that support, pull back on US spending, that these other figures like China may become increasingly pivotal. And that, of course, we see that visit by the foreign minister, Ukraine's foreign minister, to China last week.
Just briefly, how sensitive are the trade issues between the two countries, Italy and China?
Well, in some ways, they do seem to have sort of, on a bilateral, from a bilateral point of view, do seem to have sort of got the show back on the road. Does seem like the agreements, and there's some MOUs. Of course, we always wait to see if they transpire, but it does seem like we are moving in the right direction for Italy, at least.
Rebecca Choong Wilkins there, Bloomberg Asia government and politics correspondent.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Asia podcast, bringing you the stories making news and moving markets in the Asia Pacific. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to get more episodes of this and other shows from Bloomberg. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen. And always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app.